A man refuses to let an elderly woman into a hotel because of her modest, disheveled appearance. Upon learning that she was the new owner, the lobby of the Golden Hotel sparkled under luxurious crystal chandeliers. Polished marble reflects the footsteps of wealthy guests as the staff moves with absolute precision in this whirlwind of luxury. Garcia, the head receptionist, rose from the mahogany desk in an impeccable suit and a knowledgeable smile. Martin handled the complaints coolly, his sharp eyes scanning each newcomer, classifying them as worthy of praise or scorn. Meanwhile, Mr. Rodriguez sweetly greets a famous businessman, and the bellboy takes Mr. Rodriguez's suitcase. When Martin noticed a stain on the floor, Mr. Ramirez shouted to the young cleaner passing by. "The stain is there," the boy hurried worriedly with the mop. Martin watched him like a hawk, tapping his foot impatiently. "I'm sorry, Mr. Garcia," Ramirez muttered. "Incompetence is unforgivable," Martin said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "If you can't do a simple job like that well, maybe you should look for a job that better suits your skills." A few guests looked at the scene in embarrassment, but no one intervened. Satisfied with the humiliation inflicted, Martin returned to his post, adjusting his tie, thinking his kingdom had put everything back in its place. Little did he know that his world was about to be shaken to its foundations. Meanwhile, on the sidewalk in front of the hotel, a hunched figure slowly approached. A modest-looking old woman in a worn-out coat and carrying an old suitcase stood in front of the gilded door of the Golden Hotel, her tired but determined eyes focused. As Josefina Vega crossed the threshold, her hunched figure and worn clothing stood in sharp contrast to the opulence surrounding her. Guests stared at her, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed disdain. Martin, busy with some paperwork, did not immediately notice her presence. As he approached the counter, his expression changed from surprise to disgust. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said in an icy voice, "how may I help you?" Josefina approached the counter and pulled out her old suitcase. "Good afternoon, young man, please give me a room." Martin stepped down without bothering to hide his disdain. "I'm afraid there has been a misunderstanding. This is a luxurious establishment. Perhaps you can find something more suitable downtown." Josefina's tired but bright eyes stared at Martin. "I have the means to pay, if that is what you are worried about." Martin's voice spoke before he was forced to call security. Josefina remained impassive. "Dignity forged through decades of struggle," she said. "The young man made a grave mistake. The only mistake here is that you entered through the door he broke." Martin lost his patience and called security. Two burly men approached Josefina. She glanced at them and then turned to look at Martin, a mysterious smile appearing on her wrinkled lips. "Very nice," she said quietly. "I guess I'll have to do this differently." She pulled her phone out of her pocket and dialed the number. "Mr. Mendez, yes, it's me. It seems we'll have to speed up the announcement. I'm in the lobby and... well, the welcome hasn't been very warm." Martin's face paled, a terrible feeling beginning to form in his mind. The lobby of the Golden Hotel fell into a deathly silence, the tension clearly visible. Josefina calmly put away her phone, her eyes never leaving Martin's increasingly pale face. Suddenly, the front door swung wide open. Mendez, an older man in an impeccable suit, entered with two executives. Their footsteps echoed on the marble floor as they walked straight towards Mrs. Josefina. Mendez bowed with deep respect. "As it was a misunderstanding, we were not expecting your arrival until tomorrow." Mendez turned to the staff and guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Mrs. Josefina Vega, the new owner of the Golden Hotel." A murmur of surprise ran through the lobby. Martin felt the floor open beneath his feet. I think the guy at the front desk is planning to call security, Josefina said sarcastically. Maybe we should let them finish their work. Mendez frowned. Martin, right? She couldn't say a word clearly, she could only nod weakly. Her expression completely gone. This is unacceptable, Mendez declared. Martin, suspended until further notice. Please present your credentials and leave immediately. Martin trembled as he stepped out from behind the counter and nearly fell over as he passed Josefina. Not so fast, young man, she said, her voice soft but firm, not yet. I have decided your fate. The hallway held its breath. Josefina looked around taking in everyone's reactions. I want to see all the staff in the conference room in 15 minutes, she ordered. We have much to discuss regarding the future of this hotel. While the employees were scattered in a flurry of activity, Josefina turned to Martin, who looked like he was about to faint. I think we will have a very interesting conversation. Sometimes youthful appearances can be deceptive and second chances are rare and precious things. With those mysterious words, Josefina walked away leaving Martin stunned in a world he no longer recognized. The private room at the Golden Hotel was filled with a tense silence. Josefina sat in an armchair, looking out the window at the city spread out below. Her mind wandered to memories of a distant, painful past. 50 years ago, a young Josefina walked the dusty streets of a remote neighborhood in a tattered dress and worn-out shoes, telling a story of suffocating poverty. In her arms, a baby cried from hunger. Forgive me, my daughter. She whispered through her tears. I cannot take care of you as you deserve. The scene changes. Josefina, heartbroken, abandoned her child at the door of the orphanage, the baby's cries echoing in her ears as she walked, vowing to study at night, climbing the stairs little by little, taking advantage of every small chance. Her first business, a small grocery store, grew into a chain of stores and then into real estate in stocks. Every penny earned is one step closer to the son she lost, but success comes at the cost of sleepless nights, broken relationships, and a constant feeling of emptiness that no amount of wealth can fill. Josefina blinked, coming back to the present. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman aged by time and sadness but steely-eyed. Mrs. Vega, Mendez's voice interrupted her thoughts. The staff has gathered. Are you ready to talk to them? Josefina slowly stood up, determined to renew. Yes, it's time to start. As she walked to the meeting room, Josefina thought of Martin with his arrogance and cruelty. Maybe he doesn't know, she told herself. I can't afford to get my hopes up again. However, a small voice inside her whispered that perhaps her long search was coming to an end. In the meeting room of the building, the Golden Hotel was seething with anxiety as Josefina entered, followed by Mr. Mendez. The staff, from managers to housekeeping staff, sat upright in their chairs. Josefina looked around the room and briefly paused on Martin. Huddled in a corner, his previous arrogance replaced by clear fear. Good morning everyone, Josefina began, her voice determined despite her fragile appearance. As you know, I am the new owner of this hotel and I'll be honest with you, I don't like what I saw. A worried whisper ran through the room. This hotel has forgotten its fundamental purpose, service. Josefina continued, I have seen discrimination, arrogance and a lack of empathy. But the changes start today. She announced a series of sweeping changes, pay increases for lower-level staff and a policy of treating all guests equally, regardless of their social status. And as for you, Mr. Garcia, she said, looking at Martín. Consider yourself on probation. He has a week to prove that he can change his attitude. When the meeting broke up, Martín tried to work furiously. He could not lose this job, not now. He needed a plan for the next few days. The hotel was a hive of activity overseen by Josefina herself. The changes were observed by those close to him, especially Martín. For his part, Martín was torn between resentment and fear. During the day he pretended to be kind, but at night he plotted to sabotage the old woman. He convinced some disgruntled employees to make small mistakes, hoping that Josefina would become discouraged and abandon her plans. However, she was not so easily fooled. She noticed the furtive glances, the whispers behind her back, but instead of anger, she became sad. She saw in Martín a reflection of a system that rewarded cruelty and punished compassion. One night, while reviewing reports in her suite, Josefina felt a sharp pain in her chest. She trembled as she brought the pill to her lips. "No, now," she muttered, "there's still so much to do." Outside, the city slept, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the Golden Hotel, a drama that had just begun and promised to shake the foundations not only of the hotel but of the lives of all involved. As dusk turned the city sky orange, Josefina headed toward the hotel restaurant to oversee a menu change. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness hit her. And she stumbled against the wall, her vision blurred, and she felt her legs give way. Mrs. Vega's worried voice echoed down the hallway, despite his indignation. "I'm fine," Josefina whispered, but her pale face and trembling hands said otherwise. "I've called an ambulance," Martín said, genuinely worried. "No doctor," Josefina replied, "I just need to rest. Help me to my room." As Martín slowly led her toward the elevator, he noticed how fragile Josefina was in his arms. For a moment, his hostility vanished, replaced by concern and curiosity. Before Martín could answer, a knock on the door interrupted them. It was Mr. Mendez. "Mrs. Vega, I apologize for disturbing you, but there's a situation that requires your immediate attention." "Duty calls," Josefina said, thanking him for his help. "Martín. We will continue this conversation at another time." As Martín left the room, his mind was filled with conflicting emotions. On the one hand, Josefina's vulnerability had given him the opportunity to carry out his plans. On the other hand, something in her had touched a sensitive chord that he had thought had long been forgotten. In the hallway, he paused for a moment, torn between compassion and ambition. Little did he know that his actions in the coming days would determine not only his future, but that of everyone in the Golden Hotel. The next morning, the dawn was gray and rainy, as if to reflect the tense atmosphere that reigned in the Golden Hotel. Josefina recovered from her illness. The day before, she was in her office reviewing documents when suddenly a middle-aged woman burst in, followed by an agitated Mr. Mendez. "Mom, what the hell is going on here?" Josefina looked up, her expression both surprised and resigned. "Carolina. I don't plan on coming here until next week. So you really want to buy a hotel and you don't expect me to find out?" Carolina walked around the office, her disappointment clear. "Is this an old age crisis?" Mendez cleared his throat in annoyance. "Mrs. Vega, I'm sorry, but your daughter insists on seeing you right away." Josefina waved him away. When they were alone, mother and daughter looked at each other in silence for a while. "Carolina," Josefina began calmly, "this hotel is an investment, not a whim." "An investment? And the radical changes you're making? I've heard the rumors. You're endangering the hotel's reputation." Josefina slowly stood up to look at her daughter. "True reputation is built on integrity, not exclusivity." Carolina let out a bitter laugh. "Mom is still following her ideals, of mine. Do you understand that the world doesn't work like that?" "Maybe it's time for it to work like that," Josefina replied firmly. Outside the office, Martin casually walked by, catching snippets of the heated discussion. His mind worked quickly, seeing opportunities in this new family conflict. "What's wrong with you?" Carolina's voice grew louder. "You're my daughter. Don't you deserve to be a part of this?" Josefina sighed. "Carolina, you know I love you, but you're still looking for the son you gave up for adoption." A dead silence reigned in the room. Martin, on the other side of the door, held his breath as he processed this new information. It was a low blow. Carolina said, "I finally found you." Josefina's voice was almost a whisper. "I'm sorry, Carolina," her voice shook with regret. "It's just that sometimes I feel like I'll never be enough for her." Josefina walked over to her daughter and took her hand. "You are more than enough, but there are things in my past that I need to deal with. This hotel is part of that." Carolina nodded slowly, understanding and resentment in her eyes. "And where does that leave you?" "That's up to you," Josefina replied. "Can you be part of this change?" She left the sentence unfinished, the challenge hanging in the air. Outside the office, Martin walked silently, his mind spinning with this new information. The conflict between Josefina and Carolina, his lost son, all of it opened up a world of possibilities for his plans. Meanwhile, inside the office, mother and daughter look at each other, aware that their relationship is about to change forever. For better or worse, night fell over the Golden Hotel, the city lights shining like distant stars through the window of his room. Martin paced back and forth, his mind working frantically. The conversation he overheard between Josefina and Carolina resonated. Every piece of the puzzle can change your destiny. He stopped in front of the mirror, staring at his reflection with determination and doubt. "It's now or never," he muttered to himself. With determined steps, Martin left the room and headed toward Carolina's room. He knocked softly on the door, his heart pounding. Carolina opened the door, surprised to see him. "Martin, what are you doing here?" "Sorry to bother you, but I have information that might interest you," Martin said, his voice low and conspiratorial. Carolina let him in. Once inside, Martin begins to weave a story about Josefina's changes, mixing facts with half-truths and speculation. "Her mother is endangering everything this hotel stands for," Martin said with a look of feigned concern. "And I think you're the only one who can stop it." Carolina listened intently, her expression turning from surprise to outrage. "I always knew there was something behind this sudden purchase," Martin whispered, sensing that he had caught Carolina's attention. He decided to play his strongest card. "One more thing," he said, his voice deeper, "I think your mother is looking for someone for her biological son." "How do you know that?" Carolina asked. "I have my own sources," Martin answered evasively, "but think that if it were true, she was looking for you in a place that would have left you." Carolina slumped on the couch, her face a mask of mixed emotions. "In my life, I have felt that I was not enough for her," she said almost to herself, moving closer. In her suite, unaware of the conspiracy brewing, Josefina stares out the window, her thoughts torn between her tormented past and the future she longs to build. She was unaware that her actions had set in motion a series of events that would soon shake the foundations of her life and that of everyone around her. The next morning, dawn falsely arrives at the Golden Hotel. Josefina, determined to continue with her renovation plan, called a meeting with the department heads in the main conference room. As the staff settled into their seats, Josefina noticed Martin's absence. She frowned but decided to start without him. "Good morning everyone," Josefina began. "Today we will discuss changes to our customer service policy." Then, suddenly, the door opened. Martin rushed in, followed by a group of suited men. "Sorry to interrupt," Martin said with a nervous smile, but there is something urgent we need to discuss, Mrs. Vega. I am Mr. Ramirez. I represent a group of employees who have serious concerns about the direction of the hotel. Josefina stood up looking at Martin. What does this mean? Ramirez, still silent in a corner, stood up. It means, ma'am, that not everyone agrees with your hasty decisions. Ramirez continued, we have evidence that Mrs. Vega's recent actions have jeopardized the financial stability of the hotel. There are also concerns about her ability to make decisions. A murmur of surprise ran through the room. And what exactly are you proposing? Josefina asked in a calm voice. We believe it would be best for her to temporarily take control of the hotel until these concerns are resolved, Ramirez said. Josefina looked around and noticed the confused expressions of the staff. Some were confused, others clearly sided with Carolina and Martin. I understand, Josefina said in a low, calm voice. And you think you can just walk in here and take control of my assets? Martin, with renewed confidence, replied, Mrs. Vega, we only want the best for the hotel. Surely you can see that your recent performance has been erratic. Josefina was silent for a moment, looked around the room, and then, to everyone's surprise, smiled broadly. At the end of the day, she said, if you want to play dirty, we will play dirty, but I warn you that you don't know who you're messing with. She turned to Attorney Mendez, who had been watching everything with growing concern. Lawyers, contact our legal team. We have a battle ahead of us. As Josefina walked out of the room with her head held high, Carolina and Martin exchanged a triumphant glance. But a flash of doubt crossed Martin's face as he saw the determination in his mother's eyes. The Hotel Dorado has become a battlefield, and no one can predict who will emerge victorious in this struggle for power and divided loyalties. Tensions at the Golden Hotel reached their peak in the following days. Living room, once an oasis of luxury and tranquility, it has become a gathering place for rumors and furtive glances. The staff was divided into factions, some loyal to Josefina, others to Carolina and Martin. One afternoon, Lucia, the young receptionist who always admired Josefina, timidly approached her boss's office, knocked softly, and entered when she heard Josefina's tired voice inviting her in. Mrs. Vega, Lucia began, there's something I think you should know. Josefina looked at her with interest. What's wrong, Lucia? I've been following Martin, the young woman said, lowering her voice. I think he's manipulating information, changing records to make his decisions seem worse than they really are. Josefina's eyes widened. Do you have proof? Lucia nodded, pulling a USB flash drive from her pocket. I don't know who to give it to, but I trust you. Josefina took the USB, her face showing gratitude and determination. Thank you, Lucia. You were very brave. Meanwhile, at the hotel bar, Martine and Carolina were celebrating their apparent victory. We'll have total control soon, Martine said, raising his glass. Your mother will have no choice but to give in. Carolina smiled, but there was a shadow of doubt in her eyes. We're doing the right thing, aren't we, Martine? Before he could answer, they were interrupted by the sudden arrival of Josefina, accompanied by Mr. Mendez and two policemen. Good afternoon, Josefina said, her voice firm. I think we have a lot to talk about. Martine paled, while Carolina looked at her mother with a mixture of surprise and fear. Mr. Garcia, one of the officers said, we need you to come with us to answer some questions about some financial irregularities. As Martine was escorted out of the bar, Josefina sat across from her daughter. Carolina, she said softly, I know you think you're protecting the hotel, but there's a lot you don't know. Like what? Carolina challenged, though her voice shook slightly. Josefina sighed. This hotel is more than a business to me. It's a link to my past and maybe my future." Carolina's eyes widened in understanding as she understood the implications of her mother's words. "The son you gave up for adoption?" Carolina whispered. Josefina nodded slowly. "And you think Martín is your son?" Tears welled up in Josefina's eyes. "I'm not sure, but every time I see him, there's something familiar about him. I need to be close enough to investigate." The sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway was interrupted as the door swung open to reveal a panting security guard. "Mrs. Vega, we found something in Martín's office. I think you should see it." Josefina and Carolina exchanged nervous glances before following the guards. The Golden Hotel was once again the scene of revelations that threatened to change their heartbeats forever. As Josefina and Carolina followed the guards through the hotel hallways, the tension was palpable. Each footstep echoed in the silence of the hallway. They reached Martín's office, where two more guards waited by the open door. Inside, the scene was chaos, papers in open drawers strewn everywhere as if someone were frantically searching for something. "What did they find?" Josefina asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "A file," the guard replied, "hidden in a secret compartment of the desk." Josefina took the file with a trembling hand. When she opened it, her face paled. Inside were old papers, yellowed photographs, and a birth certificate. "Oh my God," Carolina muttered, looking over her mother's shoulder. A certificate naming a child born 45 years ago, to a mother named Josefina Vega. "It's him," Josefina said, her voice breaking. "Martín is my son." Carolina took a step back, shocked. But how did he get these documents in the first place? Before Josefina could answer, Mr. Mendez rushed into the office. "Mrs. Vega, we checked the security cameras. Martín left the hotel 20 minutes ago." Josefina looked sad, sitting down in her chair, the weight of the revelation weighing down on her. "He found out. That's why he's been acting so strange lately." "But why run away?" Carolina asked, confused and hurt. "Scared, confused, feeling guilty for what I did," Josefina replied, looking at the document in her hand. "Imagine finding out that the woman you were trying to destroy was actually your real mother." Silence fell over the room, everyone lost in thought. Finally, Josefina stood up with a new determination in her eyes. "We have to find him," she declared. "You can't lose him again." Carolina got over her initial shock and nodded. "Mom, I'll help. We'll find him together." Mendez intervened, "Madam, with all due respect, Martín is still suspected of fraud." Josefina looked at him, her eyes shining with pain. "And I know how to handle it, but he's my son, Mendez, my son, and I have to talk to him before anyone else." As she left the office to organize the search, Josefina paused for a moment to tour the hotel she had purchased in the hope of finding her missing son. Now, hope has become a complicated and painful reality. The Hotel Dorado once again becomes the setting for a family drama that threatens to change everyone's lives forever. With the promise of more secrets revealed and wounds to heal, night falls over the city, enveloping the Hotel Dorado in an eerie darkness. In the presidential suite now converted into a makeshift operations center, Josefina, Carolina, and the security team work frantically to locate Martín. "We've checked the traffic situation in the area," one of the guards reported. "It seems he took a taxi downtown." Josefina nodded, her expression worried and determined. "We have to find him before it's too late." "Carolina, can you contact any of his friends?" Carolina shook her head in disappointment. "No one knows anything. Or at least that's what they say." Suddenly, Lucia came running into the room. "Mrs. Vega, I just remembered something. A few days ago I heard Martin talking on the phone about a place called El Refugio. It seems important to me." Josefina's eyes lit up with hope. "El Refugio? Does anyone know?" Mendez, who had been calling around the corner, came over. "I think it's an old orphanage on the outskirts of town. Closed many years ago, but that could be very important to Martin," Josefina suddenly understood. "That's where we should look." As they prepared to leave, Carolina approached her mother. "There's something you need to know," she said, her voice shaking. "When I find Martin, what will become of you?" Josefina turned around in surprise. "Carolina, honey, what do you mean? Now that I found my biological son, where will he be?" Carolina couldn't finish her sentence, tears were about to fall. Josefina took her daughter's hand. "Listen to me carefully. You are my daughter, nothing changes that. Nothing, absolutely nothing. I took you in 5 years later, not to replace you, but because I did. I loved you from the moment I saw you, and that love will never fade." Finally, Carolina let her tears fall and hugged her mother. "I am so sorry for my behavior." Josefina calmed her down. "We will have time to talk about everything. Now we will go find your brother." As she left the hotel, Josefina couldn't help but feel a mix of anxiety and hope. On the way to the hideout, which promises to be the end of a decades-long search but also the beginning of a challenging new chapter. The taxi speeds away into the night, taking Josefina and Carolina to an encounter that will change their lives forever. The Hotel Dorado is silent, witness to the secrets and tragedies that have shaken its foundations in recent days. The taxi drove through the dark streets of the city, moving away from the bustle of the center towards the forgotten suburbs. Josefina looked out the window, a whirlwind of memories and fears in her mind. Carolina sat beside her and silently held her hand, offering tacit support. After what seemed like an eternity, the car stopped in front of a dilapidated building, with a rusty sign hanging at the entrance to the children's shelter. "My God," Josefina whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "This is where they left my son." Carolina squeezed her mother's hand. "I'll go with Mom." They got out of the taxi and approached. "The presents must be here," Josefina said, her heart racing. They moved forward along the wooded path, each step echoing in the silence of the night, like echoes of the past that refused to be forgotten. Josefina hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door, the sound echoing throughout the empty space of the building. Seconds passed and it seemed like hours before she finally heard footsteps approaching. The door slowly opened to reveal Martin, his face pale and his eyes red from crying. "I knew you would see me," he said hoarsely. Josefina stepped forward, her eyes filled with tears. "Martin, my son." But before she could get closer, Martin stepped back. "No, Mom, you can't call me that after everything that happened." "Please," Josefina pleaded. "Let me explain." Martin looked past her and noticed Carolina for the first time, a bitter smile escaping his lips. "Oh, and Mom brought her real daughter." Carolina felt hurt by his words. "Martin," Josefina chimed in, "it's not what you think. We all make mistakes. But we're here to fix things." "Fix everything?" Martin's voice rang out. "How can we correct 45 years of denials and lies?" Josefina took another step forward, her voice shaky but determined. "You're right. I can't erase the past, but I can explain why I did what I did, and I can give you a future, if you're willing to listen." For a moment, silence enveloped them, the palpable tension of years of secrets and pain condensed into that moment. Finally Martin spoke, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Why? Why did you abandon me?" Josefina, heartbroken but full of determination, began to speak, her voice mixing with the night wind, revealing a story of poverty, desperation, and a love so great it forced her to make difficult decisions. "The most difficult of my life." As the truth came to light, the old orphanage seemed to hold its breath, as if the walls themselves were witnesses to a long-awaited reconciliation. The interior of the abandoned orphanage is dark, lit only by the dim glow of an old lamp. Josefina, Martin, and Carolina sat on rickety chairs, the dust of years floating between them. Josefina, her voice shaky but determined, began to tell her story. "When I was pregnant, I was young, poor, and afraid," she began, looking directly at Martin. "Your father abandoned us as soon as he found out. Mom was left alone, penniless, homeless." Martin listened in silence, his face a mask of emotion. "I did everything I could to take care of you. Working non-stop until the last day of my pregnancy," Josefina continued, "cleaning the house, selling anything on the street. But when you were born, I had nothing to give you, not even a roof over your head." Carolina sat next to her mother, holding her hand in support. "The night I brought you here was the coldest night of my life," Josefina continued, "not because of the weather but because of the emptiness I felt. But I swore to you that one day I would come back for you when I could give you the life you deserve." Martin, with tears in his eyes, finally said, "Why did Mom never come back?" Josefina looked down. "I tried. Believe me, I came back 2 years later, but they said you were adopted. They didn't give me any more information. It took me years to look for you, but all the clues were there. It was a dead end." Carolina, looking at the woman she until recently considered her rival, said, "I took you in 5 years later, not to replace you, but because my love for you was immediate and I can't deny it. But I never stopped thinking about you or looking for you." Silence filled the room, heavy with secrets and untold pain. Martin just spoke, his voice barely more than a whisper. "All my life I felt like I was missing something. That I didn't belong to me. When I found out the truth, I didn't know how to face it." Josefina raised her eyes and pleaded. "Martin, I know I made unforgivable mistakes, but if you give me a chance, I will spend the rest of my life making it up to you." Carolina, who had remained silent, intervened. "Martin, I know there's a lot to handle, but if you're willing, I'd like to meet my brother." Martin looked at both of them, his expression mixed with confusion, pain, and a glimmer of hope. "I need time to think, to process all of this." Josefina felt respect for his decision. "I understand. We'll be here when you're ready." As they stood up to leave, Martin stopped them. "Wait, there's something you need to know about the hotel. What I did, and what's going to happen." In the darkness of the old orphanage, Martin begins to confess his actions, unraveling the web of lies and manipulation that has been woven. As night falls, and with it the promise of a new dawn for this newly formed, reunited, and deeply hurt family, the sunrise finds Josefina, Carolina, and Martin still in the old orphanage. The light of the rising sun filtered through the dusty windows, illuminating their tired but determined faces. Martin had spent the last few hours confessing everything, from how he had manipulated the hotel's financial records, his alliance with Carolina based on lies, and his desperate attempt to sabotage Josefina. "I'm sorry," Martin concluded, his voice hoarse with emotion and exhaustion. "I was so blinded by ambition and resentment that I didn't realize the damage I was causing." Josefina, who had been listening to everything in silence, finally spoke. "What you did was wrong, very wrong, but I understand the pain that led you to it." Carolina, still processing the extent of Martin's betrayal, added, "I'm partly responsible for this too. I let my insecurities cloud my judgment. Now what? First we have to go back to the hotel and face what awaits us, Josefina said. We can't hide anymore. We have to face it as a family, Martin nodded, his expression mixed with relief and concern. I'll do anything to correct my mistake. I'm willing to face the consequences. Carolina, with new determination, said, we won't let anyone destroy what we've built. As they made their way back to the hotel, Josefina couldn't help but feel hopeful. Although the road ahead is full of challenges, this is the first time in many years that she feels like her family is complete. The taxi speeds away into the night, taking Josefina and Carolina to an encounter that will change their lives forever. The Golden Hotel falls silent, a witness to the secrets and tragedies that have shaken its foundations in recent days. The taxi wound through the dark streets of the city, away from the bustle of the center toward the forgotten suburbs. Josefina looked out the window, a whirlwind of memories and fears in her mind. Carolina sat beside her and silently held her hand, offering unspoken support. After what seemed like an eternity, the car stopped in front of a dilapidated building, with a rusty sign hanging at the entrance to the children's shelter. My God, Josefina whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. This is where they left my son. Carolina squeezed her mother's hand. I'll go with Mom. They got out of the taxi and approached. The presence must be here, Josefina said, her heart racing. They moved forward along the wooded path, each step echoing in the silence of the night, like echoes of the past that refused to be forgotten. Josefina hesitated a moment before knocking on the door, the sound echoing throughout the empty space of the building. Seconds passed and it seemed like hours before she finally heard footsteps approaching. The door slowly opened to reveal Martin, his face pale and his eyes red from crying. I knew you would see me, he said hoarsely. Josefina stepped forward, her eyes filled with tears. Martin, my son. But before she could get closer, Martin stepped back. No, Mom, you can't call me that after everything that happened. Please, Josefina pleaded. Let me explain. Martin looked past her and noticed Carolina for the first time, a bitter smile escaping his lips. Oh, and Mom brought her real daughter. Carolina felt hurt by his words. Martin, Josefina interjected, it's not what you think. We all make mistakes, but we're here to fix things. Fix everything. Martin's voice rang out. How can we fix 45 years of denials and lies? Josefina took another step forward, her voice shaky but determined. You're right. I can't erase the past, but I can explain why I did what I did and I can give you a future, if you're willing to listen. For a moment, silence enveloped them, the palpable tension of years of secrets and pain condensed into that moment. Finally Martin spoke, his voice barely more than a whisper. Why? Why did you abandon me? Josefina, heartbroken but full of determination, began to speak, her voice mixing with the night wind, revealing a story of poverty, desperation, and a love so great that it forced her to make difficult decisions, the most difficult of my life. As the truth came to light, the old orphanage seemed to hold its breath, as if the walls themselves were witnesses to a long-awaited reconciliation. The interior of the abandoned orphanage was dark, lit only by the dim glow of an old lamp. Josefina, Martin, and Carolina sat on rickety chairs, the dust of years floating between them. Josefina, her voice shaky but determined, began to tell her story. When I was pregnant, I was young, poor, and afraid, she began, looking directly at Martin. Your father abandoned us as soon as he found out. Mom was left alone, penniless, homeless. Martin listened in silence, his face a mask of emotion. I did everything I could to take care of you, working non-stop until the last day of my pregnancy, Josefina continued, cleaning the house, selling anything on the street. But when you were born, I had nothing to give you, not even a roof over your head. Carolina sat next to her mother, holding her hand in support. The night I brought you here was the coldest night of my life, Josefina continued, not because of the weather but because of the emptiness I felt. But I swore to you that one day I would come back for you when I could give you the life you deserve. Martin, with tears in his eyes, finally said, "Why did Mom never come back?" Josefina looked down. "I tried. Believe me, I came back 2 years later, but they said you were adopted. They didn't give me any more information. It took me years to look for you, but all the clues were there, a dead end." Carolina, looking at the woman she until recently considered her rival, said, "I took you in 5 years later, not to replace you, but because my love for you was immediate and I can't deny it. But I never stopped thinking about you or looking for you." Silence filled the room, heavy with secrets and untold pain. Martin just spoke, his voice barely more than a whisper. "All my life. I feel like something is missing, it doesn't belong to me. When I found out the truth, I didn't know how to handle it." Josefina opened her eyes and pleaded. "Martin, I know I made unforgivable mistakes, but if you give me a chance, Mom will spend the rest of my life with me. I'll make it up to you." Carolina, who had remained silent, stepped in. "Martin, I know there's a lot to deal with, but if you're willing, I'd like to meet my brother." Martin looked at both of them, his expression mixed with confusion, pain, and a glimmer of hope. "I need time to think, to process all of this." Josefina felt respect for your decision. "We'll be here when you're ready." As they stood up to leave, Martin stopped them. "Wait, there's something you need to know about the hotel, what I did, and what's going to happen." In the darkness of the old orphanage, Martin begins to confess his actions, unraveling the web of lies and manipulation that has been woven. As night falls, and with it the promise of a new dawn for this newly formed, reunited, and deeply hurt family, the dawn finds Josefina, Carolina, and Martin still in the old orphanage. The light of the rising sun filtered through the dusty windows, illuminating their tired but determined faces. Martin had spent the last few hours confessing everything, from how he had manipulated the hotel's financial records, his alliance with Carolina based on lies, and his desperate attempt to sabotage Josefina. "I'm sorry," Martin concluded, his voice hoarse from emotion and exhaustion. "I was so blinded by ambition and resentment that I didn't realize the damage I was causing." Josefina, who had been listening to everything in silence, finally spoke up. "What you did was wrong, very wrong, but I understand the pain that led you to it." Carolina, still processing the extent of Martin's betrayal, added, "I am partly responsible for this too. I let my insecurities cloud my judgment." "Now what?" "First we have to go back to the hotel and face what awaits us," Josefina said. "We can't hide anymore. We have to face it as a family." Martin nodded, his expression mixed with relief and concern. "I will do anything to correct my mistake. I am willing to face the consequences." Carolina, with new determination, said, "We will not let anyone destroy what we have built." As they walked back to the hotel, Josefina couldn't help but feel hopeful. Although the road ahead is full of challenges, this is the first time in many years that she feels like her family is complete. The day Martin returned was cloudy, as if the sky reflected the mix of emotions floating in the air of the Golden Hotel. Josefina, Carolina and Lucia waited in the lobby with faces that were both excited and worried. When the door opened and Martin entered, a deathly silence filled the place. He looked pale and haggard, but his eyes shone with determination like never before. Josefina was the first to move, hugging her son tightly. "Welcome home," she whispered. Carolina joined the hug, and for a moment the three of them were oblivious to the curious eyes that were abandoning them. Finally, Martin stepped away and looked at the employees who had once feared and respected him. Now they watched him with a mix of caution and curiosity. Martin took a deep breath and stepped forward. "I know that many of you have reasons to hate me or distrust me," he began in a shaky but determined voice. "I'm not here to ask you to forget what I did, but to show you with my actions that I can change. That we can all change." A murmur spread through the crowd, some nodded slightly, others remained skeptical. Josefina, seeing the tension, intervened. "Martin will be attending different areas of the hotel as part of his recovery. He will be supervised and will have to do the same as any employee. I ask you to give him a chance, not for me, but for what he represents, the possibility of redemption." Lucia, who had been watching silently, stepped forward. "I'll be working with Martin on the first day," she announced, surprising everyone. "If anyone can keep a close eye on him, it's me." Slowly, some of the employees began to disperse, approaching Martin to greet him enthusiastically. As normal hotel operations continued, Carolina approached her mother. "Do you think it will work?" she asked quietly. Josefina looked at Martin, who was now listening appreciatively to Lucia's instructions. "It has to work," she replied. "For the good of all." As the day progresses, Martin immerses himself in his work, performing tasks he previously considered suitable for his position. He helps out in the kitchen, acting with a humility and dedication that surprises many. As night falls, Josefina finds Martin sitting alone in the empty hotel bar. She sat beside him in silence. After a moment she asked, "Martin, how are you feeling?" He sighed, "To be honest, Mom, I feel very tired. But also somehow at peace." Josefina took his hand. "It's just the beginning, son. We have a long way to go." As mother and daughter shared this quiet moment, the Golden Hotel seemed to sigh, surrounding them as if the building itself realized it was witnessing a new chapter in its long history. Outside, the first stars appear in the night sky, promising a new day full of challenges but also full of hope. As the weeks passed, the Golden Hotel began to undergo a subtle but significant transformation. The initial tension surrounding Martin's return gradually gave way to cautious acceptance. One afternoon, as Josefina was reviewing financial reports in her office, she heard a noise in the lobby. When she went outside to investigate, she discovered an unexpected scene. Martin was standing in front of an angry-looking customer, gesturing angrily, demanding to speak to the manager. "This hotel has become a circus," the man shouted. Josefina quickly walked over, but before she could intervene she saw something that left her speechless. Instead of responding with his usual arrogance, Martin remained calm. "Sir, I understand your frustration," he said in a calm voice. "Can you explain to me exactly what the problem is? I will personally make sure it is resolved." The guest was taken aback by the response and lowered his voice slightly. "My room was not the suite I booked and room service took a long time." Martin nodded, understanding. "I sincerely apologize. Please allow me to check on the situation immediately." Josefina watched in amazement as Martin handled the situation with grace and dignity, professionalism she had never shown before. Within minutes, Martin had solved the guest's problem by offering a free upgrade and VIP service as compensation. As the guest walked away, looking calmer, Josefina approached her son. "I'm impressed," she said with a smile. "The way you handled it was admirable." Martin shrugged, but there was a glint of pride in his eyes. "I learned from the best," he replied, looking at his mother. Plus, I think I finally understand what customer service really means. At that moment, Carolina and Lucia came over, having witnessed the whole thing. What a sight, little brother, Carolina joked. Looks like you finally learned the family business. Lucia added with a sheepish smile, you've come a long way, Martine. The four of them shared a knowing look, aware of how much had changed in such a short time. That night, as they dined together in the hotel restaurant, Josefina looked around with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. The Golden Hotel, once a symbol of her desperate search, had now become the home she had always longed for her family. I propose a toast, she said, raising her glass. To our second chance and to the family we have formed against all odds. As their glasses met, the soft sounds of conversation and background music seemed to blend into a melody of hope. The Golden Hotel, a silent witness to the journey, glowed with a new light as if reflecting the transformation of its inhabitants. Outside, the city continued its relentless rhythm, but within these walls, the miracle of redemption and reconciliation was unfolding. For Josefina, Martine, Carolina, and Lucia, the whole world seemed contained in a moment of unity in promise. Autumn had come to the city, dyeing the trees gold and red, a perfect reflection of the new spirit of the Golden Hotel. One cool morning, Josefina called a special meeting in the main lobby. The staff gathered. Curious, and expectant. The atmosphere was markedly different from a few months ago, where there had been tension and suspicion. Now there was cautious camaraderie. Josefina, with Carolina, Martine, and Lucia at her side, addressed the group with a warm smile. Good morning everyone. I have gathered you today to share some exciting news, she began. Thanks to the efforts of each of us, the Dorado Hotel has not only survived the crisis, but has emerged stronger than ever. A murmur of approval rang out in the room. But more importantly, Josefina continued, we have achieved something beyond numbers. We have created a real community here. Martine took a step forward, his posture expressing a humility that had previously been foreign to him. I want to take this opportunity to thank you all for the second chance you have given me. I have learned more in these months than in my entire previous life. Carolina added, and I have learned the true meaning of family and teamwork. Lucia, who was usually shy, also spoke up. This hotel has taught us all that is possible. Josefina spoke back. That is why we have made an important decision. Starting today, we will implement a profit-sharing program for all employees. Surprise and joy spread through the room like a wave. Furthermore, Josefina continued, we will establish a fund in the hotel's name to help single mothers and children in need. Some of the staff even hugged each other, excited by the news. As the meeting ended amid animated conversations and passionate plans, Josefina looked around, feeling the joy and connection with each person who had become an integral part of their lives. Mother, Martine said, his eyes shining with emotion. I never thought I would say this, but thank you for not giving up on me. Carolina hugged her brother. No, Lucia, she said with a shy smile, adding a family that had grown beyond blood ties. Josefina looked around the hotel, once a symbol of her search, and now the heart of her rebuilt family. This is just the beginning, she said, her voice full of promise and hope, as they walked out of the living room together. The autumn sunlight streaming through the windows bathed the lobby in a golden glow. The once golden hotel, a building of pure luxury, is now full of life and renewed purpose. Outside, the city continues its pace, but within these walls lies a story of redemption and unconditional love that transforms not just a family but an entire community. As Josefina walked away with her loved ones, she knew she had finally found the home she had always wanted. Winter has come to town, blanketing the streets in white and turning the Golden Hotel into a cozy refuge from the cold. One night, as the Christmas lights flickered softly in the lobby, Josefina was in her office going over the final details of the hotel's annual celebration. Suddenly there was a knock at the door, interrupting her thoughts. It was Martin with a busy expression. "Mom, we have a problem," he said as he walked in. "What's the problem?" Josefina asked, feeling her anxiety growing. "Here are the hotel's former partners," Martin explained, his voice tense. "They're here to claim what's theirs. They're in the lobby right now." Without wasting a second, Josefina and Martin headed out into the hallway. There they found 3 men in suits, with hard, determined faces. There stood Carolina and Lucia, trying to remain calm. "Gentlemen," Josefina said, trying hard to remain calm. "It's been a while. I didn't expect to see you here. How can I help you?" The man smiled, but his eyes were still cold. "You see, we've been watching the changes you've made to this impressive hotel. I must admit, but we think it's time for you to give us back what you gave us." Martin stepped forward in defense. "This hotel belongs to my mother. You have no right to be here." "Ah, but yes, we answered," said another man. "These contracts are from many years ago and are no longer valid." "That's what you think," the third man said with a sinister smile. "Our lawyer has other ideas." The tension in the lobby was palpable. Guests and staff watched the scene with curiosity and interest. Carolina, who was listening respectfully, intervened. "Gentlemen, I suggest we continue this discussion in private. I'm sure we can come to an agreement, reasonable." The leader of the group, a man named Ernesto, nodded. "Very well. You have 24 hours to prepare an offer. If not, we will meet in court." As the men left, Josefina and her family gathered in a tight circle. "What will we do?" Lucia asked, her voice shaking. Josefina looked at each of them with unwavering determination. "We will do what we have always done, fight together." Martin, sensing a new determination in her eyes, said, "We will not let them destroy what we have built." As the senior team arrived at Josefina's office to plan their next move, the Golden Hotel seemed to hold its breath. A new battle is coming, one that will test not only the strength of her family but also the loyalty of everyone whose lives are affected by the hotel's transformation. Outside, the snow continued to fall, oblivious to the tragedy unfolding inside. But for Josefina and her family, the coming storm promises to be far more intense than any winter snowstorm. The next morning, the cold, gray colors reflected the tension that permeated the yellow hotel. Josefina, Martin, Carolina, and Lucia spent the night reviewing documents, making calls, and strategizing. In the conference room, now turned temporary headquarters, the group met with the hotel's lawyer, Mr. Vasquez. "The situation is very complicated," Vasquez began, adjusting his glasses. "Those old contracts are outdated but could cause legal problems if they go to court." Josefina nodded, her face determined. "What are our options?" "We can fight it in court," Vasquez replied. "But it would be a long and expensive process, or we could try to negotiate." "Negotiate with those vultures?" Martin asked, anger clear in his voice. Carolina chimed in. "Maybe that's our best option, if we can come to an agreement." Josefina didn't interrupt, her voice was firm. "This hotel is more than just a business, it's our home, our family. We won't budge an inch." Lucia, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up. "I have an idea. What if we get the community involved?" Everyone turned to her, curious. "Think about it," Lucia continued, "people have faith in the Dorado Hotel. It's not just ours, it's part of this city, of many people's lives. If we show how we've positively impacted the community, maybe we can put some pressure on the public. A ray of hope flashed in Josefina's eyes. Lucia, that's a great idea. We can do an event, invite the media, and showcase all the charitable work we've been doing. Carolina excitedly adds, we can ask employees and guests to share their stories about how the hotel has changed their lives. The atmosphere in the room changed from desperation to determination and enthusiasm. Josefina stood up, her presence filling the room. Here's the plan. We have less than 24 hours. Martin, you take charge of contacting the media. Carolina, you gather statements from staff and guests. Lucia, you prepare a presentation about our community programs. I'll be in charge of communicating with our allies in the city. As everyone dispersed to fulfill their duties, Josefina stayed behind for a moment with Attorney Vasquez. Do you think this plan can work? She asked in disbelief. Josefina looked out the window at the city beyond. This hotel is more than bricks and mortar, it's a symbol of second chances and redemption, and we will fight with everything we have to preserve it. As she left the room, Josefina felt a mix of fear and hope. The next 24 hours would decide not only the fate of the Golden Hotel but also that of the family she found and built within its walls. Outside, the snow began to fall again as if the sky itself wanted to cover the city with a blanket of anticipation before the battle. The lobby of the Golden Hotel was bustling with activity in the hours since the plan was postponed. It has been transformed into a vibrant hub of community activity. Colorful banners displaying photographs of the hotel's charitable projects hang on the walls. Information desks line the walls with enthusiastic employees sharing stories about how the hotel has changed their lives. Josefina, dressed smartly but with an air of determination, moved through the crowd, greeting journalists, community leaders, and tourists alike. In one corner, Martin coordinated with the camera crew, making sure every aspect of the event was captured. Carolina, meanwhile, was leading a group of elderly beneficiaries of one of the hotel's programs to the center of the room. Lucia, overcoming her usual shyness, stepped up to the podium to give an enthusiastic presentation about the impact of the Hotel Dorado on the local community. This is not just a fancy place, she said, her voice shaking slightly but gaining strength with each word. It's a home for many, a place of second chances. Suddenly a whisper ran through the room as the former partners, accompanied by a delegation of lawyers, entered the room. Their faces expressed surprise and disgust at what was happening in front of them. Josefina approached them with her head held high. Gentlemen, welcome. As you can see, we have a lot to show you. The leader of the group, a man named Ernesto, frowned. That's ridiculous, Josefina. Do you think an emotional scene will change the legal facts? Before Josefina could respond, an elderly woman limped over. Excuse me. She said to Ernesto, do you want to close this place? Ernesto was surprised and nodded slowly. The old woman shook her head. Young man, this hotel gave me a home when I lost my house in the earthquake last year. Mrs. Josefina and her family have treated me like a queen. How can you want to destroy something so beautiful? One by one, employees, clients, and those who benefited from the hotel's programs came forward and shared their stories. Ernesto and his partners began to be confused and distrustful. Martin, seeing an opportunity, approached with a microphone. Gentlemen, do you have any comments on these stories? The camera flash begins to flicker. Reporters came closer, eager to capture the businessmen's reactions. Finally, with a sigh of disappointment, Ernesto turned to Josefina. It seems we have underestimated what you have built here, Josefina. Perhaps we should reconsider our position. A roar of joy echoed through the room. Josefina tearfully embraced Martin and Carolina. Lucia joined them, her face beaming with happiness. As the celebration continued around them, Josefina looked out from her family at the guests. "Guest, the Golden Hotel shines beyond its crystal chandeliers and gold trim like the light of the community of love and solidarity, of redemption." Outside, the snow had stopped falling and a ray of sunshine was breaking through the clouds as if the sky itself wanted to join in the celebration. Spring, an unexpected but well-deserved victory, has arrived in the city, bringing with it an atmosphere of renewal that seems perfectly synchronized with the changes in the Golden Hotel. As the sun began to set, bathing the garden in golden light, Josefina closed her eyes, thanking the long and difficult road that had led them to this moment of perfect harmony. I invite you to comment your impressions and opinions in the comments section. It would be an honor if you would leave me a like. Please see the following story, it is impressive.